In Russia's billionaire class, loyalty to Putin is survival. But a rare few refuse the leash. While others bow, they build empires beyond borders.
Power was given to authority to use just this criteria. They don't need to justify that you did something bad.
Hidden fleets, offshore labyrinths, and alliances no Kremlin decree can touch. This is the oligarch even Putin can't control, and the shadow world he commands. Alisher Usmanov. In post-Soviet Russia, few men adapted faster than Alisher Usmanov. When industries lay in chaos, he didn't wait for order. He shaped it. Steel through Metallo Invest, telecom through Megaphone, and a shrewd early bet on Facebook turned him into a billionaire across continents. At his peak, his empire was worth over $19 billion. But wealth wasn't his real weapon. It was his deep entanglement with the Russian state. Usmanov moved like an unofficial finance minister, facilitating deals, shielding Kremlin interests, and lending commercial legitimacy to politically charged moves. When Western sanctions hit in 2022, yachts were seized, bank accounts frozen, and governments branded him a Kremlin proxy. The world expected a fall. Instead, Usmanov vanished from public view, slipping into a web of offshore trusts, foundation layer holding companies, and shell corporations beyond sanction reach. Even his $600 million super yacht Dilbar was a puzzle. Registered in Malta, owned by a trust in Liechtenstein, managed in Dubai. Investigators couldn't prove whose it truly was. Behind layers of legal obscurity, insiders claim he built a parallel financial reality, guarded by an elite private security unit of former GRU, Mossad, and MI6 operatives. The public empire crumbled. The hidden one thrived. Andrei Melnichenko. Andrei Melnichenko didn't rise from oil or gas. He built his fortune from the unglamorous lifeblood of agriculture. Fertilizer. Through Eurochem, he became one of the largest producers in the world. With SUEK, he dominated coal. Together, they formed an empire worth over $18 billion. But Melnichenko didn't flaunt palaces. He built a fortress that floated. Sailing Yacht A. At $500 million, it was a carbon fiber monolith nearly 470 feet long, bristling with technology worthy of a naval warship. Anti-drone defenses, radar scramblers, biometric locks, escape pods. It was designed for disappearance. When sanctions arrived in 2022, the yacht proved its purpose. AIS tracking went dark, satellite images found nothing, and ports denied ever seeing it. Days before sanctions hit, Melnichenko had stepped down as its legal owner. A Swiss-managed trust took over, rendering him untouchable on paper. Intelligence reports hinted at encrypted communications between the yacht and a private server farm in Kazakhstan. Former military contractors boarded in Turkey under diplomatic waivers. His location became unknowable. Yet his companies surged, exports rose, and profits flowed through third parties immune to Western warrants. Melnichenko hadn't vanished to survive. He'd vanished to operate, a ghost in control of a billion-dollar machine. Vladimir Lysin. Vladimir Lysin avoids headlines, but behind Russia's industrial curtain, he holds the arteries of the state. As chairman and majority owner of Novolipetsk Steel, NLMK, he controls one of Russia's largest steel producers, the material that builds cities, weapons, and war machines. But steel is only half his power. Through rail and freight ventures like Freight One and UTLCERA, Lysin commands the transport network that moves those materials. He embedded himself so deeply into Russia's logistical core that removing him would choke the state's own supply chain. When sanctions swept through in 2022, most oligarchs scrambled. Lysen had already prepared. Months earlier, assets were restructured into holding companies in Singapore, the UAE, and Hong Kong, all beyond Western enforcement. Ownership was fragmented across jurisdictions with no disclosure laws. At the heart of his empire is a facility insiders call the Core, hidden in Lipetsk. Outwardly, it's a logistics HQ. Inside, it's a fortress, Faraday-shielded rooms, air-gapped computers, biometric vaults, and private contractors from Russian special forces. Steel shipments still moved. Freight still flowed. Revenues swelled with every global price spike. Lysen's secret wasn't resisting the Kremlin. It was becoming indispensable to it. In Russia's hierarchy, that makes him untouchable. Roman Abramovich. Roman Abramovich was the most visible of Russia's oligarchs, a global dealmaker whose wealth stretched from oil pipelines to Premier League football. His ownership of Chelsea FC made him a fixture in London society. His yachts were icons, his parties magnets for power. Then in 2022, he broke an unspoken rule. He tried to broker peace between Russia and Ukraine. Acting as an unofficial mediator, he shuttled between Kiev, Moscow, and Istanbul, until he was poisoned during negotiations. It wasn't fatal, but the message was unmistakable. Abramovich vanished from public life. Yachts relocated, London mansions sold, his name erased from company boards. His movements became shadows. A jet in Tel Aviv one week, Istanbul the next, then Moscow, with no confirmation he was aboard. Those who met him passed through layers of counter-surveillance, stripped devices, rotating meeting locations, offshore legal buffers. Sanctions stripped him of $10 billion, but they didn't strip his autonomy. He shifted holdings into trusts and proxies across Israel, Portugal, and jurisdictions immune to Western pressure. Profits flowed through untraceable channels. Abramovich now exists in a no man's land, neither controlled by the Kremlin nor protected by the West, seen by neither side as loyal yet still standing. Leonid Michelson. Leonid Michelson built his fortune not from oil but from natural gas, controlling Novatek, Russia's second-largest producer. His pipelines stretch from the Arctic Circle into Europe, weaving through geopolitics as much as geography. When sanctions hit, ports closed, and billions in offshore holdings were frozen. But Michelson had planned years in advance. Long before Western pressure, Novatek's international arms were shifted into a labyrinth of shell companies in Dubai, Oman, and Singapore. On paper, the assets were split. In reality, they still answered to him. Ownership passed through silent nominees, profits landing in trusts no investigator could pierce. His defenses weren't only financial. Michelson assembled a private security force unlike any in Russia's energy sector. Veterans of Spetsnaz, trained in counter-surveillance and urban combat. Access to him was controlled, his compounds shielded by biometric vaults, signal jammers, and electromagnetic barriers. Inside Novatek, a cyber division of ex-government engineers quietly scrubbed digital footprints and monitored for leaks. Even as sanctions targeted his name, LNG projects pressed forward, often under rebranded joint ventures in China and India. Michelson's empire didn't just survive in the shadows, it thrived there. His greatest strength wasn't force or wealth, it was silence, weaponized. Alexei Mordashov. Alexei Mordashov, head of Severstal, wasn't known for flamboyance. He preferred quiet boardrooms to public displays, which made his response to sanctions all the more startling. When the EU froze accounts, blocked shares, and seized assets, the world believed his empire had collapsed. That was the illusion. Within days of the first sanction announcements, ownership documents began shifting. Public filings showed divestments, but behind closed doors, Mordashov was transferring control, not losing it. Family members, close allies, and long-trusted business partners suddenly emerged as majority shareholders. New companies in Cyprus, Liechtenstein, and the Cayman Islands absorbed his interest in Severstal's satellite ventures. Assets sold at a loss were quietly reacquired under new names through offshore mergers. By the time analysts caught on, his wealth had been reassembled offshore. Clean, protected, untouchable. Travel became untraceable. Jets chartered under disposable shell firms. Yacht transponders shut off mid-voyage. Contact with European institutions ceased, while investments quietly expanded into Asia and the Middle East. Journalists wrote of his downfall. Economists charted Severstal's decline. But in Dubai, insiders watched Mordashov's circle acquire real estate, energy stakes, and infrastructure projects, all without a trace. For him, illusion wasn't weakness. It was the new definition of power. Igor Sekin. Igor Sekin, CEO of Rosneft, isn't just an oligarch. He's Putin's enforcer in a suit. Controlling Russia's state-owned oil giant gave him leverage not just in markets, but in geopolitics. Contracts in Venezuela, covert shipments to sanctioned states, strategic choke points in Europe and Asia. Sechin's deals carried the weight of the Kremlin. His boardrooms operated like intelligence bunkers. Former FSB and GRU operatives vetted every visitor, encrypted every meeting, and traced every call. Investigators who dug too deep were quietly reassigned, discredited, or silenced. When the Ukraine war triggered global sanctions, Sekin became a liability, even to Putin. His yacht Amore Vero was seized in France, and holdings abroad were exposed. But instead of retreating, he activated his network. Rosneft assets shifted to proxies in Asia, Africa, and Latin America, continuing operations beyond Western reach. Sekin withdrew from public view, consolidating power inside the Kremlin. He became more dangerous, not less. A warlord backed into a corner with nothing to lose. Yet his empire still relied on the regime, still tethered to borders and political structures. For all his reach, Sechin couldn't escape one fact. He remained a creature of the Kremlin storm, not above it. Gennady Timchenko. Gennady Timchenko didn't just survive the fall of the Soviet Union. He engineered a new empire from its wreckage. Through Gunvor, his Switzerland-based oil trading firm, he built the bloodstream of Russia's global energy trade, moving not just crude, but influence and silence. Timchenko saw storms years before they broke. Long before Crimea, long before Ukraine, he buried his wealth in offshore structures stretching from Liechtenstein to Singapore. When the US blacklisted him in 2014, most billionaires panicked. Timchenko simply resigned from Gunvor the day before sanctions hit. Assets had already been shifted, ownership reshuffled, operations untouched. Gunvor kept trading. Oil flowed through ports and terminals across Eurasia with Timchenko's fingerprints faint but present. He secured dual citizenships, reportedly in Finland and Armenia, insulating himself with multiple legal identities. While other oligarchs scrambled to restructure after sanctions, Timchenko had already rehearsed collapse. His companies could be flagged, his name banned, but the machinery of his wealth had no face and no borders. This invisibility wasn't hiding, it was design. Yet such detachment breeds suspicion. Rivals watch. The Kremlin takes note. In Russia's elite circles, survival isn't just about evading the storm. It's about outlasting the purge that follows. Timchenko's game was endurance. Vagot Alekperov. Vagot Alekperov, founder of Lukoil, built the last major independent oil company in Russia. A rival to state-owned giants and a quiet thorn in the Kremlin's control. Operating in over 30 countries, Lukoil's pipelines and refineries carried a significant share of Russia's energy beyond Putin's direct reach. When sanctions and market chaos hit in 2022, pressure came from every direction. Western regulators, Kremlin hardliners, and internal competitors. Then Alekperov made a move few saw coming. He resigned. Publicly, it looked like surrender. In reality, it was a calculated retreat. Allies took his board seat, shadow agreements preserved his influence, and Lukoil's operations barely missed a beat. Pipelines kept flowing, profits rebounded, and scrutiny faded. Investigators found his $4.5 billion fortune fragmented, holdings scrubbed from public records years before sanctions struck. Alekperov didn't flee abroad. He stayed in Russia, but not as a visible target. By stepping back without truly letting go, he removed himself from the firing line and avoided the fate of louder oligarchs. For decades, he'd earned Putin's trust by brokering stability and sidestepping direct confrontation. His genius wasn't defiance or submission, but the ability to dance between them. He remained present, just far enough from the spotlight to survive. Dmitry Mazepin. Dmitry Mazepin, head of Uralchem and Uralkali, never sought the trappings of Russia's oligarch class. No football clubs, no towering yachts, no tabloid excess. His power was built quietly and hidden long before the world came looking. Years before sanctions hit, Mazepin buried his empire beneath offshore entities, family trusts in Liechtenstein, and boards based in the UAE. Director names rotated quarterly, ownership vanished behind legal firewalls, and personal assets were stripped from public record. By the time regulators tried to trace him, there was nothing left to seize. What made him untouchable wasn't just secrecy, it was necessity. His companies controlled critical fertilizer supplies in a world already strained by war and inflation. Sanctioning him risked triggering food crises from Africa to Asia. Even the Kremlin understood. Remove Mazepin, and Russia's leverage in global agriculture would fracture. He stepped down from his boards in 2022, a move framed as compliance but designed to tighten control. Allies replaced him. Decision-making never left his circle. Trade routes shifted through Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, and Belarus, bypassing European ports entirely. By 2023, filings in Kazakhstan revealed a deeper play. Logistics networks tied to India, China, and even EU intermediaries. Mazepin wasn't planning for Putin's Russia. He was building an empire that could outlast it. In Russia, wealth without obedience is a death sentence. Yet he remains untouchable, unowned, unstoppable. His power doesn't just survive the Kremlin's grip, it slips beyond it. If you want more untold stories of the world's most elusive power players, subscribe and join us in uncovering the next one.